I have a PowerPoint, 250 slides that I'm going to go, no, not that many. Like it's a board meeting, my deck. But I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. I don't think I've ever seen green grass here at Beaver Creek because I've never been here this time of year. But it's wonderful. So what I was going to talk about, What I was going to talk about is Vanderbilt and steamboats and the history of commerce in New York City, but I said, no, that's probably not right. This is a freedom conference, so I want to talk about freedoms, and freedoms Silicon Valley style, whatever that means. So we're all familiar with, now that I want to, we're all familiar with FDR's 4 freedoms, right? Worship, speech, from want, and from fear. Norman Rockwell famously captured that, and of course, the first 2 are in the Constitution, the second 2 are a welfare program, and from our tax dollars, but I could talk about that for the next 45 minutes. But instead, I want to dig into what it means, what freedoms does Silicon Valley provide to all of us? And so the TISL is there to remind me what they are. One of them is innovation, but I'm gonna go through those 4 freedoms somewhat quickly. The first thing, before I even got started, I said, it would be cool if I could take my TISL, my freedoms, and transform FDR's and Rockwell's 4 freedoms into something else. So, of course, now we have generative AI and for image generation. So I ran those 4 through Gemini. I wish it's not yet ready to create a PowerPoint presentation for me if I said, 4 freedoms, Silicon Valley, what would it come up with? It's mostly gobbledygook. But instead, I just ran the images through. So let's see what that looks like. We'll start with freedom to trade. Now, again, this is how Gemini came up with the Rockwell representation of freedom of trade. That's all I typed in. So it's kind of fascinating what AI can do. I need to give everyone here a business lesson. Let's call it a Steamboat Silicon Valley MBA. All right, you ready? Okay. That's vertical, and that's horizontal. Got it? Everyone got it? Okay. What do I mean by that? Okay, Ford has a plant. They first output from this River Rouge plant in Michigan was 1927. They're still spitting F-150 trucks out of this place, but not in the mode that it was in. At that point, Ford was the most, except for GM, the most vertically integrated company, and this was the most vertically integrated plant. There's ports there. They would bring in iron ore, and they'd bring in copper. They'd bring in probably sand and rubber, and they'd roll cars out, right? They did everything from start to finish in this one River Rouge plant. I don't think Ford is the global leader that we think of because vertical is not the way to go. IBM, huge vertically integrated company. They did everything from manufacturing chips to writing their operating system, application, sales, service. They wrapped the plastic around it. They were going into the 70s, early 80s, they were half of technology industry revenue, 90% of the profits, and no one IBM doesn't roll off your tongue like it used to. AT&T. I started life at Bell Labs. They were disgustingly vertically integrated. They laid the wires, they did switches and phones. I worked on chips for modems. This is in the early 80s, in that switch phone thing. They had local, long distance, service, billing. They did everything. And while I was sitting at my desk, I worked for 3 different companies in the early 80s. It was AT&T, Bell System. It was American Bell and American Information Systems as it got broken up. Yet still, even the piece parts were vertical. As we know, vertical empires don't last because they try to do everything themselves and they leave on the table innovation that happens in a lot of other places. Then the PC came along, and the PC, when IBM came out with Versa, and this is a Dell, IBM broke their own rules, and they said, okay, let's buy chips from Intel, and this Bill Gates came along and said, oh, I can do that operating system for you, and it created this horizontal market, and it exploded, right? IBM thought they'd sell 250,000 of the original PCs, and now it's, whatever it is per year. And so you can, in increasing value, there's motherboards, disk drives, all the way up to the microprocessor operating systems, to those that wrap plastic around it. And so as an investor, this is the greatest thing, because you can just pick off one of those horizontals and invest in the winners. And all you needed was slices of intellectual property. And this really started a global revolution. Now the 2007, right, the iPhone came along. The iPhone is like the UN of products. There's parts from everywhere in that thing. And as you turn over your iPhone, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China, right? So yeah, we import these iPhones and it caused a trade deficit, but really the value accrues to Apple and all of the component makers inside of it. It's this wonderful horizontal model. So now I think the US is sitting on, or was, the top of a horizontal empire. And so, China does a lot of low-end assembly, as does Singapore and Malaysia displays. And as you go up in value, you get power and prestige and wealth for society. So 20 years ago, I came up with the expression, we think they sweat. And it was simple, right? We were doing the thinking parts of this global entity, and others would sweat. But that's okay, because then they could gain capital and build, educate the next workforce and move up the food chain. But meanwhile, the whole world got wealthier because of this. Here's the shipping supply chains, but you can imagine those as fiber optic cables. The world is interconnected, running this horizontal empire. Okay, until April. In April, we got tariffs. Well, we had them before, but we got these crazy reciprocal tariffs. I happened to be in Saigon when this happened. The Vietnamese, who are just kind of getting around to liking Americans again, they like our money, got slapped with, 46% tariffs. The one that's higher down there, it's hidden, 49%, was an island in the Pacific that only has penguins. No one could quite understand it. And you go, well, why tariffs? Why, if we think they sweat, why bring the sweat part of the equation back to the U.S.? And so the way I look at it is tariffs, specifically, they're telling Tim Cook, this administration telling Tim Cook, bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And why? Vietnam makes things for $2 an hour. China's $6 an hour. In the U.S., it's $35 an hour on average. Prices are going up or quality's going down, something has to give. And I look at this as just roadblocks in this horizontal structured economy. And whenever there's roadblocks, it's a problem. So it's state meddling in free trade, right? That horizontal empire, that is neoliberalism, right? Which has got bad mouth by the last administration and this administration. So I say, just say no to industrial policy. In the last administration, it was Jake Sullivan. He couldn't even say the words industrial policy. He called it industrial strategy, like we didn't know the difference, right? And the Trump administration doesn't talk about industrial policy, but that's exactly what it is, and owning pieces of Intel and charging chip companies to export to China. This breaks up what is a ginormous wealth-creating entity. Okay, let's move on. Freedom to innovate. That's another thing that Silicon Valley brings to the world. Now, this is a crazy-looking slide, and if you zoom in, right, there's a woman building a robot, but there's a baby creating something of sort of Norman Rockwell era, whatever. That's not how I think of innovation. Innovation is the ability of entrepreneurs to create something new and solve a problem. So a lot of Silicon Valley lore comes from Stanford, right? Stanford was the magnet to bring in Shockley. And Shockley was the Bell Labs guy, part of the team that built the first transistor in 1948. And he goes, okay, he was going to go to Palm Springs, but they didn't have a decent university in Palm Springs. And the weather's almost as nice in Silicon Valley. So he built Shockley Semiconductor Labs in beautiful Mountain View. And it has beautiful views of the mountain, by the way. And then he was so annoying, and we know that many of you may know the eventual thinkings and racist thinkings of Shockley. So there was a traitorous 8. Gordon Moore and Bob Noyes were the founders of Intel, but before, and Kleiner was started Kleiner Perkins. I've met about half of these guys, fascinating. But they left Shockley and said, we're going to create, they got money from Fairchild, we're going to create Fairchild Semiconductor. And that was the start of entrepreneurs leaving maybe some bureaucratic place that they didn't like. In 1978, to help the story along, the US government changed the rules to allow pension funds to invest in venture capital. Venture capital before that was, it was a dirty word. Entrepreneur was a dirty word for a while. And it was too risky. We're not going to let pension funds. Well, in 1978 that changed, which created the modern venture capital system. So you get brains, you get entrepreneurs flocking there, you get venture capital, and even Fairchild Semiconductor started breaking up. Now, I wish this was in a horizontal. I stole all these slides from the interweb somewhere or another. There were spin-offs. Intel's on there, Advanced Micro Devices on there, a whole bunch of great companies are on there. And so you got to take the ability of taking an org chart from any company. When I worked at Bell Labs, they would hand out org charts, and they'd update them once a month. And the top guy was executive director, and I was 8 levels down from the executive director. And then one day they published the org chart from the CEO down. I go, oh, this is kind of cool. So I took that chart and I put it on top of my chart as executive director, and there was an air gap. Right? So the VP that was at the lowest level of AT&T's top-down chart didn't match my bottom-up chart. So I figured once that I was 38 levels down in the hierarchy, and which is why I left. So what you can do with startups is take those functions and have it be done not by hordes of tens of thousands of bureaucrats who are filling out time cards and all that. It can be done by entrepreneurs sitting in a room, staring at laptop screens and inventing the future. Now, again, this is the new horizontal model. That's how you do it. You do it with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs come in and just take over one of those slices. Now, startups fail. I know there's some venture capitalists in the room, and they like to talk about their winners, but 9 out of 10 often fail. And you can see the disgust on the look of these people's faces. But that's how it works. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And so we have startups now, all you have to do is put AI, .ai in your name or something, and you can raise hundreds of millions at billions of valuations, and most of them are going to be dumpster fires like this one. But fortunately, many of them are going to work. And this is the point where I have to explain how Silicon Valley and the wealth that is created from Silicon Valley is for all of us. And no one ever thinks that, oh gosh, Jeff Bezos is an evil billionaire and blah, blah, blah. Well, this is only 20 years ago. Look at the top market cap companies. Microsoft was there because they were selling Windows and Excel and the like. But Pfizer, Citigroup, Exxon, was an oil company until 10 years ago when Apple popped to the top because of the iPhone. Now Apple's market cap, I think, is $3 billion. NVIDIA last year was 2.75. I can tell you, I don't know what the market's done today, but it's more than that by quite a lot. So wait, only the rich are getting richer and the poor people are being left behind. Au contraire. William Nordhaus, the Nobel economist, figured out that companies only capture maybe 4 or 5% of the value of their products. The rest go to those that use it. Microsoft spreadsheets. Wall Street created billions and billions in value from being able to use Microsoft spreadsheets as opposed to, I remember when I started on Wall Street, there were people with X-Acto knives and Mylar paper running around. So, think of your iPhone, think how your iPhone, and what a delight sometimes, except when it crashes, is to use, and that's the societal value. Unless someone's running a monopoly, society benefits a lot more than any of these companies do. Okay. Part of this page is about showing about change. And change is hard. We know change is hard because the status quo is called that for a reason. It's sticky. They don't want to change. They don't like someone else coming in. IBM certainly didn't like the Wintel coming in and taking away their business, or digital equipment killing them in mini computers. And certainly, wait till we see the disruption from AI. And so I think one of the more important things that Silicon Valley provides is the freedom to snark. Now, I'm a wise guy, and so maybe that's why I like this. And by the way, zoom in again, and this young woman there's a Pepe the Frog with blood coming out of its eyes. I don't quite understand it. But again, this is Gemini image generation. You never know what you're going to come up with. What do I mean by freedom to snark? Well, there's a long history, right? Punch in the UK, selling ices at a fire. National Lampoon. I have this issue, or I had it. I probably lost it in several moves. If you don't buy this magazine, we'll kill this dog. I mean, and why is snark so important? Because it drives change. It forces you to think different. I don't think Albert Einstein ever said think different. And by the way, the English major police came after Apple. That's because it's supposed to be think differently. But I think think different is a better thing. Question authority, and there it is. Leave the status quo behind. But we don't just leave the status quo behind in Silicon Valley. We come up with something, and then we just go around them. We leave them intact, but we just go around them and forge ahead. And part of that is the mental attitude of saying, well, why shouldn't we do this? The technology exists. Let's just create the future by doing that. And that's what Snark provides. So of course we have Twitter, X. I like calling it Twitter. I don't know what X means. And I've been in print several times calling it a cesspool of Snark. And then I immediately follow it with, which is why I like it, right? And it's very true. Here's Elon Musk tweeting. He's not Xing, he's tweeting about LinkedIn. I hope Iran doesn't destroy our top secret nuclear facility, pictured here in the top left corner. All right. Greta Thunberg, you should own a green car. Now, everyone of a certain age gets the Steve McQueen bullet reference of the Mustang driving through the streets of San Francisco. I happen to agree. And then this next one explains all of the influence that Twitter and other platforms have on people's psyche. And then I'll give you an example. Guy writes, if a beautiful woman disagrees with me, I will immediately change my views. I have no principles. And then a woman replies, well, maybe you should have principles. And he says, you're right. Maybe I should. So I'll do the quick version of this because it's still painful. Almost 3 years ago, Silicon Valley Bank imploded. It happened to be the largest, or one of the largest bank implosions of its time. And I happened to be up here. I wasn't here. I was in Breckenridge. And I was skiing with friends. And, there's bad coverage. And I'm up in the at the lunch place up at top. And I could barely there's no Wi-Fi, of course, and first world problem, right? And I could barely, and I'm going, wait, Silicon Valley Bank? This is on the Thursday. And on a Friday, it went under, and I already had, because I was going skiing, I already had a column written. My column runs on Sunday, but in Monday's paper. And I already had something. I was free and clear. And I go, oh no, Silicon Valley Bank, I write about technology and Wall Street, and there's both in one sentence. And it wasn't clear why they blew up. So it's not fun when with your friends saying, excuse me, I need to go look at my phone. I finally figured out they had the wrong kind of bonds and it wasn't hedged. and all those things. And so at gate A32 at Denver Airport, I sat down, this is on Saturday, and I cranked out something that went and described it, and I thought I had something unique. In it, I had said, Silicon Valley Bank may have been distracted by diversity demands. Now, may was a weasel word, because I happen to know they were. I mean, if you look at their statements, they tell you more about the ethnic and sexual leaning makeup of their board rather than 20 years of financial experience, or this person knows this, or this person knows that. And they did not have a chief risk officer, again, because it was because of diverse demands. I knew this, and I wrote it, and it posted Sunday, and I was fine. And then Monday morning, someone on Twitter goes, oh, the Wall Street Journal saying Silicon Valley Bank blew up because of diversity. Now remember, this was peak DEI. This is 2023, right? I mean, it was about as close. So I was tagged, my handle was tagged in all those, and I got the crap beat out of me. And so much so that I have 4 grown sons over 21, and each one of them started, texting me, Dad, are you okay? Because the cancel police came after me, and I got invited on MSNBC. Now, for someone from the Wall Street Journal to be invited on MSNBC, that's like a miracle, right? And I said, well, I'm not stupid. I know you just want to beat me up, so I wasn't going to do that. And if I gave you the list of people and that were bashing me, it was crazy. Those that stepped up to help out, like this, crickets. And, talked to the folks at the Journal. They said, don't say anything. It'll create another news cycle. Just shut up and bite your tongue, and it'll pass. Well, it took about 2 weeks to pass. The magazine Vanity Fair was nice enough to call me a white supremacist, which I would have canceled my subscription, but I don't have a subscription to Vanity Fair, nor will I ever will. So there we go. So that, in a cesspool of snark and Twitter, you got to take the good with the bad. But I love that it exists because it stirs up the pot, and that's what Silicon Valley is all about. Okay, last one. Freedom to live and let live. This is the, I don't know, you can call it the libertarian view, but it's the freedom-loving view, and there's a double-edged sword. Here we have little children, instead of having Pepe the Frog with blood coming out, they're have some, I've been in lots of museums looking at old religious paintings, and they are sort of making the same signs. Why? I don't know. So let's call on our friend Pinto from Animal House. And he rightly figured out that there's a good side and a bad side. And for my purpose, Silicon Valley does good and it does evil. And the good we know, right? Think of all the things that are now in your lives. You push a button and this big hunk of metal comes pulling up to you within 3 minutes and drives you where you want to go. You can get food delivered. You can get goods delivered. You can have your laundry done. Someone to come clean your house, make you well, and next door is gossip, I suppose. And so the joke in Silicon Valley was that, everywhere, was that Silicon Valley creates tools to do things that your mother used to do, right? And it's very true. But even beyond that, right, it's created this wonderful communications medium. We could all be waving at Zoom. I prefer being face-to-face. But technology, again, on the good, it helped us communicate. It helps us educate. It entertains us, whether it's passive entertainment or active entertainment with video games, going around the world and shooting people. But then, right in the midst of all these things, these wonderful things, the pandemic came along. Sorry, we're closed. Stay 6 feet apart. Stay home. And I remember going, you can't tell me that I have to stay home. They go, well, yes, we can. It was the most destruction of freedom that I've certainly ever experienced in my life. And then you get these things. Stay home to stop the spread. Restarting our economy starts by staying at home. What the heck does that even mean? And so the question Oh, and then this was the worst offense. This was classrooms, especially, let's call it K through 8. It was the most destructive thing. There were teachers sitting in front of a screen with empty classrooms and, kids on the call with masks on. And there's one kid, I'm sure, who's just running, there's always one kid that knows how to do this. He's running a little video loop and feeding that into Zoom, and he's off, playing Call of Duty and shooting people while his classroom is going on. The only good news about this is parents kind of sat there and watched what their kids were being taught in school. That's a whole nother story. The question is, why? Why were they able to lock us down? Why were they able to close schools? And the reason is because they could. Because Silicon Valley and all of us invented all these wonderful tools so that you can sit at home and you could be entertained, you could have food delivered, you could do telecommunications with your doctor, and on and on. And it was the most annoying thing ever. I've invested in a bunch of great companies, and I remember kicking myself saying, it's because those great companies exist that the powers that be could shut down the economy without fully shutting down, shutting down the economy. Here's more good and evil, if you will. I've boarded a flight to Europe where the boarding pass is your face. Wow, pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty cool. TSA has it. In fact, they now have touchless ID where you just go up, takes a picture, it knows who you are. I did it at SFO, and the guy says, oh yeah, that machine's not working. So it has a little ways to go. But here the guy takes your driver's license and puts it in, he pulls up who you are, and then compares it against you. And this is fun when I put this talk together, because I never knew what the other side looked like. And there it is, right? It's, there's a normal or match. It has your driver's license photo versus what you're looking at, of course, behind plexiglass, or it was. But we don't just have cameras at TSA and at airports, we have them everywhere. This is in China, but London, New York, San Francisco, everyone's doorbell camera. There are cameras everywhere. And that same AI that can do facial recognition instantly at TSA can also pick off who is walking down the street and who is doing what. We already have license plates readers. Most police cars now, they just scan every license plate that goes by, and they can know, who's, and it's great in solving crime. They're not supposed to do dragnet. That's maybe not a dragnet, but it kind of is. And it's worse in China. So first of all, I think, if you're an investor, this is going to kick off a bull market for anti-facial recognition glasses and makeup and masks, and so invest wisely. But in China, as we know, and the last panel talked about maybe the incompatibilities of China's political system and real innovation and economic growth. But in China, they have this social credit score. And you can look through that, but if you zoom in, you can get a maximum of 1,300 if you do charity work and take care of elderly family members, you move up. But if you jaywalk and illegally protest and then not visiting aging parents regularly, you get demerits. And you go, what? Well, that's, and if you've watched Black Mirror, that was an episode, Community had one called Meow Meow Beans that blew away what Black Mirror did, because society eventually breaks down as people are fighting for Meow Meow Bean points. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves in China, but I think it gets worse before it gets better. I found this paper, it's in Chinese, thanks to AI. I can translate it. Measures for the Administration of National Network Identity Authentication Public Service. And you can go through the list of Director of State Administration of Radio and TV is one of these guys, and Public Security of the People's Republic of China. What it is increasingly in China, you won't sign up with Baidu or Alibaba. You can surf and use all those websites anonymously. You go, oh, that's pretty cool. Yes, but you register with the state. So the state knows everything you're doing. Alibaba, not as much. And this is one of the scariest things that I've seen come out of China, which makes me, every time you hear of central bank digital coins or a national ID, or, the national ID kind of works if you go into certain government sites, ID.me as your sign-in. And this scares the crap out of me that there's a centralized database somewhere with a central bank digital coin. They can track every transaction. Oh, it's going to be to stop drug money floating around. Yes, but it can know what you bought at CVS and on and on. So I talked only a little bit about AI, and I'm not going to spend that much time, but AI has the same dilemma as Pinto about Silicon Valley. There can be good AI and there can be evil AI. And AI, no one really knows how it works, right? It's a pattern recognition system, but it's patterns of patterns of patterns of patterns. And they have to sort of play with these generative AI systems and ChatGPT to get the output so it doesn't, accuse you of being a Nazi. There's all sorts of crazy things. But what I'm concerned about is all these companies is which way they lean. They've already been caught, putting their thumb on the scale of a liberal agenda, because this is Silicon Valley after all. They say Silicon Valley is getting conservative. It's very slowly. Trust me on that. So the best advice is if one's going to err on the side of liberty and individual freedom. And that's a never-ending vigil, which it sounds like everyone in this room has bought off on, is the idea of liberty and individual freedom. So that's it. Those are Silicon Valley, 4 freedoms Silicon Valley style. And so I appreciate you listening. We're going to take some Q&A, apparently.
The question that jumped to my mind was, how much of that does President Trump understand? Because he seems to think that the situation you talked about, the iPhone designed in America, sold to Americans, but manufactured overseas, represented as a trade deficit in our balanced budgets, that's us being ripped off.
Right, and it's exactly the opposite. And I think others have observed this, is that Donald Trump came of age in an era of losing our steel mills and our manufacturing capacity and the creation of the Rust Belt. And he spent his time building buildings in the 80s and 90s and casinos, but he was still stuck with, oh my gosh, people are out of work. And that's bad. We need to bring that manufacturing back. I don't think it was clearly a great political agenda, vote-getting agenda. But what disturbs me more are those that whisper in his ear, or they don't whisper, they yell in his ear. Howard Lutnick saying, we're gonna have the job of screwing iPhones together come back to the U.S. And you go, please no, that will screw all of us. Pardon the pun. So I don't think economics does a great job of understanding horizontal business models. I really don't. I mean, they're still stuck. Industrial economists are stuck in that vertical model. Like, why would you give up profits to someone else if you can just do it yourself? Because that's, in my view, the economic dogma. And the answer is because innovation, you can't hire all the smartest people in the world. Innovation happens somewhere else. And therefore, you need to incorporate the best of all the brightest people in the world by owning a layer in that horizontal stack.
So when I talk to people who are more on kind of the populist Republican, maybe they would call themselves nationalist right, and are very skeptical of free trade, very drawn to Trump's more protectionist agenda, and I speak about these benefits that you outlined so eloquently, the refrain that you'll hear is that cheap shit from China is not worth the hollowing out of our manufacturing base and our culture. If it is so true, and I do personally believe this, that this is so wondrous, this prosperity and innovation that this has all brought about, why does that kind of a refrain, dismissing it all as just cheap crap from overseas and Walmart, why does it resonate with so many people?
Because some of it is cheap shit from China with plastic that breaks and you got to throw it out and buy the next one. But they haven't flipped over their iPhone, and plus it's in like a 2 font, and hard to read. But designed in California and assembled. Used to say made in China. Now it says assembled in China, because no one really digs into the details of, I said it before, Vietnam, $2 an hour in manufacturing, China, $6 an hour, which is why stuff is moving to Vietnam, and it's $38 and $35 to $38 an hour in the US. And I've read some surveys that people said, oh, you know, jobs are going to come back, these manufacturing jobs are going to come back. And a lot of people who would get those jobs say, well, I don't want to do that, right? And so the idea that, you know, everyone's just flipping burgers, either you're designing AI systems or flipping burgers is a naive look at the American economy. It's such a robust, and the global economy. And when you pay, you know, $600 for a phone, you don't think about all the wondrous things, of course it's $1,000, that are in that iPhone, that, you know, Androids are cheaper. No one thinks about the wondrous things because Silicon Valley does a terrible job of PR for themselves. Like, look at all the, now they're going, oh, look at, we're going to spend $500 billion on, you know, data centers in the US, but they don't talk about jobs. And the reason is most jobs lost were not because of China, it was because of productivity, of manufacturing productivity. And that's going to happen even more so. China is going to be on the raw end of robotics, which is why they spend so much time on robotics. Because, you know, if you think about China, yeah, they're a manufacturing hub, but they're really a logistics hub. And robots coming back to the US, it doesn't have to work in steel mills, but just filling boxes and moving it from one side of the thing to another is going to be the productivity revolution that is going to be the undoing, I think it's already happening, of China's, you know, miracle, industrial or manufacturing miracle.
So I want to go to some of the audience questions now, and this one I'll highlight because I hear this a lot. Some people who are in general supportive of the idea of free trade will say, but Trump is using tariffs as a negotiation tool. So do you see tariffs, this is the audience question, as useful leverage for international trade negotiations?
The law says that is so under emergency conditions. Now, Section 230, I forget all the, I wrote a piece a bunch of months ago looking at it. And so, yeah, if you want to use tariffs, remember, tariffs are authorized for Congress to do, not the president. They gave some to the president during times of emergency or for national defense. But I have a hard time believing that importing avocados from Mexico has to do with national defense or that there's some avocado emergency. I think they're abusing the power. There's a court case that looks like it's going to go south for the administration, and they're going to have to pay back all the tariffs that they've collected, and that'll make an interesting pickle for what's going on. Look, there are some national defense things. High-end chips are made in Taiwan, not in the US, because Intel totally screwed up. Now TSMC is building factories, fabs in Phoenix and around that area, and I think that's beneficial. But the way, you know, the golden share that U.S. Steel had to give up, and, you know, Intel has to give up 10% of the company to the government and charge MP Materials, and then charging 15% for NVIDIA and AMD for exports. Like, you know, that's just made up out of whole cloth. It would be better if the Department of Defense just says, look, we need these chips for these, as we talked about the last panel, interceptors. And here's $10 million. Go make them for me. Just like the government did in Operation Warp Speed with Pfizer. They didn't own 10% of Pfizer. They said, here's the advance order for the vaccines that we know we need. Go make them. And so I find the negotiating tactic, first of all, if you say something is a negotiating tactic, it's the worst negotiating tactic ever. Because the other side knows, oh, this is just a negotiating tactic. And China keeps pushing out by months, you know, when their actual tariffs are going to be set. So
Well, and I think the idea of them as a negotiating tactic to get to more free trade kind of assumes that the end goal is more free trade, which I'm not sure we can assume with this administration. So we're getting, I think, a fair, and I understand why, right? This is a Republican-leaning audience, and the temperature has shifted on these issues. We're getting a fair amount of questions kind of pushing back on the free trade. So one question I want to ask is how can you tell the towns in the Midwest whose economies remain depressed after manufacturing closures that what occurred to them is actually beneficial and that this outsourcing is in their interest?
I will say one word, Pittsburgh. Right? Pittsburgh was the epitome of steel and U.S. industrial might, and it became part of the Rust Belt. And due to long ago contributions, Carnegie Mellon is basically ground zero for the AI revolution. Like if you have a degree from Carnegie Mellon in AI, Mark Zuckerberg will pay you $100 million to come play around. That's not necessarily true, but there's a pedigree to it. And if you go to Pittsburgh today, the renaissance that has taken place from, call it clean industry versus steel, is remarkable. Now, that hasn't reached everywhere, I grant you. And that's why I talked about SNARC as an ability to drive change. Change is really hard. Unions don't like to change. The union bosses don't like change. And so, we used to be 95% farmers, and you could ask that same question of farmers. Now, farming got productive automation that helped, and the same thing has happened with manufacturing, and it's a problem. The U.S. has safety nets on their safety nets, so there's despair, but this is the inevitable change that's going to take place. The other way to do it is how Japan did it, which is they just had interlocking companies, they never laid anyone off, and they had 3 lost decades.
Yeah. So another question that touches on some of the themes you spoke about was, is new technology, because you talked about good AI versus evil AI, best left to the market to adapt? Or is it possible for policy, which I assume they mean government policy, to guide good tech versus bad tech development?
Yeah, that's a great, there was a long discussion after ChatGPT came on the market of guidelines. Like the government, the Biden administration had guidelines, and really, if you read it, it would limit the number of CPU cycles that you were allowed to use. There was just some crazy stuff in it. The Trump administration seems, because of some of the gurus that they have, seem to be more hands-off. But that's where the money is. I mean, taking 15% of NVIDIA's sales to China is not hands-off. My personal belief is put in a kill switch. Like every piece of AI should have a kill switch. Now, who has the button on the kill switch, I don't know. But I think that is going to be what saves, rather than coming up with nebulous guidelines when Chinese AI makers won't have guidelines. And will just leave us in the dust.
Right, and I think people in this audience might like the Trump administration's guidelines, but are they going to like the next administration's guidelines, right? So that is a question.
The biggest problem Silicon Valley ever had was the dot-com world came by, and we had to tie ourselves to phone lines. And then all of a sudden, remember, it's 3,000 miles from Washington, D.C. to Palo Alto, and we got discovered. Then the regulators came and said, we could regulate phone lines and dial-up and T1 lines and fiber going in, and instead all those decisions should be left up to the free market. Because again, in the dot-com era, it was a funny time of too much money following prices that were sticky in the telecom world, and it blew up. And are prices sticky in the AI world? Boy, starting to smell like it, but so far so good. We'll see what happens.
So another question, and I'll combine 2 questions from the audience here on the issue of free trade, is how do we help these people? Because I think even supporters of free trade acknowledge there are winners and losers.
Yes.
And how do we help the people who, just because of progress, end up being the losers? So one person asks about the idea of universal basic income. Another person asks about the idea of retraining, former steel workers into new tech jobs. How is that feasible? What is your answer for how we help the losers? Because they're losing through no fault of their own. It's not that they didn't work hard enough or anything like that. It's just the world around them changing.
So a hard no to UBI, Universal Basic Income, because it's yet another welfare program that will keep people in their pajamas in the basement playing video games instead of being productive members of society. I'm against all forms of UBI, and all of the tests of it so far have come out and said, yeah, there's no benefit from giving people $1,000 a month. Retraining, yes, and that's a near-term solution, but there's only one long-term solution, and that's education. And again, I talked about, especially the K through 8 of parents looking in and seeing what their kids were being taught. I remember when my kids were when my kids were in high school, I was asked to look at, my sons don't tell me much, but I looked at their biology class, and they spent a month on a recycling center and maybe an hour on mitochondria and I forgot all the names. And let alone the public school system as we know it is a disaster. I mean, it turns out people that can't read at grade level, I mean, it's a complete disaster. So who's going to have the next generation of jobs? We need to fix the education system. AI is going to be a big help to education where people can, when kids can self-pace and learning I've written a column about the Alpha School, which is now getting, in Austin, which is now getting a further press on what they do. And I think in the next 5 years, the education system, and the Khan Academy has AI tools, that whole system is going to be turned upside down once someone is strong enough to break the union stranglehold. Killing the education department, that's a start. They didn't really kill it.
Maybe soon.
But that's what's coming.
Well, guys, let's give a round of applause for Andy Kessler. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's good.